Journalist Amina Taylor joins me on the news from London via Skype. Good to have you, journalist Amina Taylor.
Hi, good to be here. My first interview since coming out of self-isolation just a few days ago. So this story very relevant to me, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Good to have you back. When you look at the lifting of restrictions, it is almost like an experiment, and one that scientists are very skeptical about. Because when you look at it all, it seems like it is based on the if not now, when strategy. How controversial is this? How controversial are residents finding this in the UK?
Well, the quote you mentioned there was one that was actually cited by the health secretary, who you mentioned there in your report, consequently tested positive for COVID despite having both jabs. There is this real battle between economic rebirth, economic growth, and of course a public health crisis. And when you look over the weekend, where figures have been, 50,000 people testing positive on Sunday, 48,000 on Saturday, it is clear that we're not out of the woods yet by any means. I mean, these are figures harping back to the beginning of the year. The real worry is with the uptake in vaccination still not at the rate it should be for the younger generation, those under 25, 18 to 25, in predominantly their sectors that are being reopened, nightclubs, theaters, mass gatherings, and so on. How do we appreciate and try and mitigate for people who may be carriers without showing symptoms? How do we stop that passage of the virus from those who might not be showing symptoms? And what does it mean for a crumbling National Health Service? What does it mean for maybe just kicking this COVID football a little bit ways down till we're talking now about the natural winter flu season meeting another period of COVID? I mean, there are some doctors on the left in this debate who are saying this isn't Freedom Day, it's a countdown to another lockdown day. And I think even just looking at my journey in this morning, what I noticed is being backed up by the figures coming out of the National Railway, where they say mask usage on public transportation has fallen by just 20% today alone. So imagine if that trajectory continues. We cannot return to normal. And we have to be clear that any impact that this variant, the Delta variant particularly here, will have in the UK will be an international one. So it's not just Boris Johnson and co making a decision that only impacts the UK. We're talking about a decision that could have consequences for other countries, other economies, especially ones that do not have as robust a vaccination program. If we're suffering under these strains, imagine another country where we've exported some of the very worst of what's going on here. It's confusing times, and I think you can see from even the government's own reaction to their ministers testing positive. How do we make a positive
Absolutely, and I don't want to lose that line of thought, because you talked about how this is not Freedom Day. Some people are saying that this is a countdown to another lockdown day. But for elderly people, I was listening to elderly people in the UK over the weekend, where they said this is not Freedom Day, it is Fear Day. Because they feel like they have not been put into consideration when it comes to the lifting of these restrictions. When you talk to us about the guidelines, if there was any consideration for elderly people who are most susceptible to this virus, by the way.
It's not just the elderly. We're talking about people with known and unknown underlying symptoms. I mean, I have a friend with multiple sclerosis and ME who is terrified of leaving her home, because even mentioning it in a shock to some people that perhaps don't stand so close to me anymore, or maybe you want to cough in a different direction, sir. These are things you don't know how they're going to be triggers. And there's so many individuals who feel their health, their safety, what happens to them in terms of just anxiety alone, that has not been taken into consideration. And I think really both Rishi Sunak, the finance minister, the chancellor here, and the health minister have made the collective decision alongside their cabinet that kickstarting the economy will be a more important issue for Britain than actually dealing with this public health crisis. And I think it really is a case of fingers crossed that the vaccination system has worked enough, and that even people who test positive, it will follow that the admission rates into hospital will not be as bad as they were. But right now, that's being done on a hope and a prayer. And dare I say, in a few weeks, if we're talking, there are estimates that this daily infection rate could go up to some 200,000. Now, we're saying it as if 200,000 people testing positive every day is a non-issue. People will get ill, and you don't have to die to have this thing really impact you. My symptoms were mild, but believe me, it was a very unpleasant situation.
It's confusing for a lot of people, I must say, especially when you're saying go to have a party, but take caution while having parties. People don't know how to interpret that. We'll see how it plays out in the coming days. Journalist Amina Taylor, thanks for talking to us, and please stay safe.